All right, so we're diving into Arthur Miller's The Crucible. It's a pretty big deal in American drama.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The Crucible is a classic.
Yeah, and we're going to find out exactly why that is.
Sounds good. When you first look at it, it seems like it's just a historical drama.
Right. It's set during the Salem witch trials back in 1692.
Exactly, in Salem, Massachusetts.
Okay, but there's so much more going on under the surface.
Yeah, sure. The thing about The Crucible is that it uses that historical setting to talk about some really big ideas.
Like what kind of ideas?
Well, think about it. Salem in 1692, you've got this small, isolated community, right? Governed by a very strict religious system, a theocracy.
Oh, so like their laws are based on their religious beliefs?
Exactly. They're dealing with all sorts of conflicts and threats, like from Native Americans.
That makes sense. It must have been a very tense and fearful time.
Absolutely. And all that tension, all that fear, it creates this perfect breeding ground for suspicion and paranoia.
Ooh, I can see where this is going.
Then, boom, accusations of witchcraft start flying.
So how does that all start? Who's the first to cry witch?
The play kicks off with a group of young women,
Right.
led by this really fascinating character, Abigail Williams. They get caught dancing in the woods, which was a big no-no back then.
Oh, I bet. So what do?
Well, to avoid getting punished, they claim they were bewitched.
So they're basically saying, the devil made me do it.
Pretty much. And then they start accusing other people in the village.
Oh, man, that's messed up.
Yeah.
So the audience knows right away that these girls are lying.
Right. That's what makes it so interesting. We get to see how manipulative they are, especially Abigail.
And that creates all this dramatic irony, right?
Yeah.
Because we know the truth, but the characters in the play don't.
You got it. It keeps you on the edge of your seat because you know these accusations are false, but you see how easily people believe them.
And how the whole situation spirals out of control.
It's scary how quickly things escalate. People start accusing each other left and right, fueled by old grudges and personal vendettas.
So it's like a power grab.
Totally. And Abigail is right at the center of it all.
This Abigail character sounds like someone you don't want to cross.
Yeah, she's pretty intense. She's not just some scared teenager. She's smart, and she knows how to use fear to her advantage.
And she has a thing for John Proctor, right?
Oh, yeah. Their affair is a huge part of the story. It's one of the things that drives the whole plot forward.
Okay, so who is this John Proctor guy?
John Proctor's the local farmer who had the affair with Abigail.
Okay.
And he is a very complex character. You can tell he's haunted by the guilt of what he did, but he also has this strong sense of right and wrong. He's a good man, but he's made some mistakes, and now he's caught in the middle of this witch hunt.
That sounds pretty rough.
It is. He becomes this sort of tragic hero, struggling to do what's right in a situation where the truth is dangerous.
So it's not just about witches and accusations.
Not at all. It's about human nature and the choices we make when we're under pressure.
Yeah, and how fear and power can corrupt even the best of us.
Exactly. And it's interesting because the way Miller writes these characters, they feel so real. Even though the play is set hundreds of years ago, the people and their problems still resonate with us today.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to society, showing us how easily we can fall into these patterns of fear and blame.
I think that's one of the reasons why The Crucible is still studied and performed today. It has this timeless quality that speaks to something deep within us.
And it definitely makes you think about the dangers of mass hysteria and how easily it can happen.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The Crucible is a reminder that we need to be careful, to think for ourselves, and to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard.
That's a powerful message, especially in today's world.
Right. It's like Miller is saying, don't let history repeat itself.
Okay, so we've got this tense atmosphere in Salem, accusations flying, and a whole lot of drama brewing. What happens next?
Well, things really start to heat up in Act 2. The narrator in some versions of the play actually compares what's happening in Salem to another historical event, the Cold War. Remember all that paranoia about communists?
Yeah, I remember learning about that in history class.
It was a time when fear and suspicion were everywhere, just like in Salem.
So Miller's making a connection between the witch hunts and the Red Scare.
Exactly. He's showing us how these patterns of fear and persecution can repeat themselves throughout history, even in different contexts.
That's pretty insightful. So what about John Proctor? What's he up to in Act 2?
Well, we finally get to see him in his own home, trying to deal with the aftermath and his affair with Abigail and this whole witch hunt situation.
It sounds like he's got a lot on his plate.
Oh, he does. And his relationship with his wife, Elizabeth, is really strained.
I can imagine. She probably doesn't trust him after what happened with Abigail.
Exactly. Elizabeth is a strong woman. And she's not one to just forgive and forget. She's suspicious, and their home is full of this unspoken tension.
That's got to be tough. So is Abigail still after John?
Oh, she is. And things get even more complicated when Reverend Hale shows up at the Proctor house.
Who's Reverend Hale?
He's this expert on witchcraft who's been called in to investigate the accusations.
Okay.
And he's a very devout man, totally believes in the reality of witchcraft. But even he starts to have doubts about what's going on in Salem.
So he's not just some witch-hunting fanatic.
No, he's more complex than that. He's trying to do what he thinks is right, but he gets caught up in the hysteria, too. And the way Miller writes him, you can see how he struggles with his own beliefs as the play goes on.
That's interesting. It sounds like Miller is really good at creating these characters who aren't just black and white. They have shades of gray.
Absolutely. He's showing us that even the people who think they're doing good can be part of the problem if they're not careful.
So what happens when Reverend Hale goes to the Proctor's house?
Well, he starts questioning them about their religious practices, trying to see if they're truly devout.
This is like an interrogation.
It kind of is, and things don't go well for the Proctors, especially Elizabeth. Abigail sets her up.
How does she do that?
It's this whole thing with a puppet.
A puppet? What's that?
It's like a little doll. And Abigail uses it to make it look like Elizabeth is practicing witchcraft and trying to harm her.
Oh, that's sneaky. So how does she pull that off?
Well, Mary Warren, who works for the Proctors, makes the puppet for Elizabeth.
Okay.
But then Abigail manipulates the situation and pretends that Elizabeth's spirit attacked her through the doll.
Whoa, hold on. So she's saying that this doll can be used to control people's spirits.
That's what the court believes. It's called spectral evidence.
Spectral evidence, what is that?
It's basically anything the accusers claim to see or experience in their visions.
So it's just their word against the accused.
Pretty much. And the court takes it very seriously.
Right.
They see it as proof of witchcraft, even though there's no real physical evidence.
That's crazy. So the court is basically just believing whatever these girls say.
Yeah, which is terrifying, right? It shows how easily people can be swayed by fear and manipulated by those in power.
And what about Mary Warren? Where does she fit into all this?
Mary's in a tough spot. She knows that Abigail is lying, but she's also scared of what will happen to her if she speaks out.
So she's caught between doing the right thing and protecting herself.
Exactly. And it's a struggle that a lot of people can relate to, right? Standing up for what you believe in can be really hard, especially when you're facing pressure from those around you.
Yeah, I can see that. So Mary's kind of a symbol of how difficult it can be to be brave in the face of injustice.
Right. And her character highlights the dangers of staying silent when you know something is wrong.
That's a pretty powerful message. Okay, so we've got John Proctor struggling with his conscience, Abigail manipulating everyone, Reverend Hale questioning everything, and Mary Warren caught in the middle of it all. Where to go from here?
Well, all these tensions and accusations come to a head in Act 3. The courtroom becomes this battleground for truth and lies, and things get really intense.
Okay, so Act 3 ends with John Proctor getting arrested. I'm guessing things don't get any better from there?
Not exactly. Act 4 jumps ahead 3 months, and Salem is, it's not a happy place.
What's happened? Give us the rundown.
Well, the whole witch hunt thing has really taken its toll. Families are being torn apart, farms are abandoned. There's just this overwhelming sense of fear and despair everywhere.
It sounds like the whole community is falling apart.
It is, really. And the jails are filled with people accused of witchcraft. Some of them have confessed just to save their lives.
But not everyone, right?
Right. Some people are still holding strong, refusing to lie, even though they're facing death.
Wow, that takes a lot of courage.
It does. And those characters, like John Proctor, Rebecca Nurse, and Martha Corey, they become symbols of resistance.
They're like standing up for their principles, even when it costs them everything.
Exactly. They show us that even in the darkest of times, individual conscience can still prevail.
And then there's Giles Corey.
Oh man, Giles Corey.
What happens to him?
Well, he refuses to plead guilty or not guilty to the charges against him.
Why would he do that?
Because he knows that either way, his land will be taken away by the court.
So he's like stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. So they decide to use this brutal form of torture called pressing.
Pressing? What does that even mean?
They literally pile stones on top of him until he either confesses or dies.
Oh my God, that's horrible. And he doesn't give in?
Nope. He dies under the weight of those stones, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a confession.
That's just brutal. But he stayed true to himself until the very end.
He did, and it makes you think about the limits of human endurance, right? What would you be willing to die for?
It's a heavy question. And what about Abigail? Does she ever get what's coming to her?
Actually, no. She ends up running away with Mercy Lewis, taking her uncle's money with her.
She just disappears
Yeah.
after all the chaos she caused.
Yep, she gets away scot-free, which I think is interesting because it leaves the audience with this sense of unease.
Like there's no real justice in the end.
Right. Abigail embodies this kind of selfish ambition and manipulation, and she never really has to face the consequences of her actions.
It's like evil triumphs, in a way.
In a way, yeah. And it makes you wonder if things would have turned out differently if she had been held accountable.
So we've got these characters who are standing up for what they believe in, even facing death. And then we have Abigail, who just slips away into the night.
Exactly. It's this contrast that makes the play so thought-provoking.
Okay, what about Reverend Hale? We left him kind of disillusioned with the whole witch hunt thing.
Yeah, well, he comes back to Salem in Act 4, and he's a changed man.
How so?
He's completely racked with guilt over his role in the trials. He realizes that he was wrong, that innocent people are being condemned, and he's desperate to try and save them.
So he's trying to make amends.
He is, but it's too late for many of them. He goes to the condemned prisoners and tries to convince them to confess even if it means lying.
He's basically saying, just say what they want to hear so you can live.
Exactly. He's so desperate to save their lives that he's willing to compromise his own principles.
That's got to be tough for him after being so adamant about the truth before.
Oh, it is. It shows how deeply the witch hunt has affected him, how much it's shaken his faith.
But the court doesn't care about his change of heart, do they?
Nope. Danforth, the deputy governor, is still determined to see the trials through. He's more concerned with maintaining his authority and the image